Right, welcome to one more session on Docker, guys. In this particular session, we will look into Docker storage, Docker volumes, and bind mount. And we will do the hands on exercise for volumes and bind mount. Now, why do we need to understand this? So, now how we can manage data in a container. Okay, we can manage that by using volumes, different types of volumes. That is what we are going to understand in this particular chapter. First of all, let me shift to my whiteboard and then let's understand the concept. Now, let us say we have a host system where we have installed Docker on this. Okay. Now, let's say I'm going to create container. This is container one. Now in this container one, let us say I have deployed one application. Let's say app one. Now this app one is generating data. Okay. Now where this data is stored? So by default, as soon as we create one container, okay, there is some storage. So now there is a hardware to the server, right? Okay. A storage, that means there's a hard disk. So there is one default directory. Okay. It is stored in the location called as slash var slash lib slash docker. Okay. There is one directory created for each and every container and the data is stored. Okay. That's fine till here. But let's say this container went down. Now, will I be able to access this data? I will not be able to access this data if the container is down. Or let's say container restarted. Okay. Then I'll not be able to access this data that is generated. Or let's say I created another container. Okay. There is, let's say, app 2 on this. Now I have a requirement that I want to share the data to this container and to this container. Is it possible? It is not possible if we don't have any volumes. So the answer to this problem is that the answer to this problem is Docker volumes. Okay. If we create Docker volumes, we'll be able to solve these problems. Okay. There are multiple types of volumes. One is called as named volumes. Second one is called as bind mount. Third one is called as temporary volumes. Okay. These are the three types of volumes that we have on Docker. Okay. Now we can create the volumes. Okay. We can simply create the volumes. And let's say this is a container. And we can create a volume and assign the volume to the container. Now what happens if I assign a volume to the container? If this container goes down also, okay, if this container goes down also, the volume data will be still there in the volume. And let's say later I created another container, I can assign this volume to this container and access the data. Or else let's say I have two containers, I can give this volume to both the containers. So this container and this container can share the data from this volume. Now, one more benefit if you have a volume like this. Now, let's say I can take a backup of this volume. So, even this volume or the hard disk fails also, still I'll have the data. or else we can take snapshots of this volume. Okay, we can, if we manage this data separately in a volume, we can take a backup or we can take a snapshot. Okay, or else we can share this volume to the multiple containers. Okay, there are three types of volumes. One is called as named volume, second one is called as bind mounts, third one is called as temporary volumes. Okay, let us discuss each one of this separately. First, let us discuss about named volumes. Now, what is a named volume? We can simply define a named volume, or let's say it is a specific user defined name. Okay, it's a user defined name to a volume. Okay, what is the use of this named volumes? The use of this named volumes are, it will have data persistently. What is the meaning of data persistent? Irrespective of reboots, irrespective of Docker containers failures, the data will be available in this particular named volumes. Like anonymous volumes. What is an anonymous volume? When I create a Docker container, Docker automatically creates one volumes and assigns that. That is called as anonymous volume. So whenever a container is failed, the volume data in the volume or volume is lost. That is basically auto-generated names by the Docker. But named volumes, users can specify the names. So if I specify name, it will be like more like predictable and easier to work with. Okay. User defined names. Named volumes are created with the names that we give. More like a human defined name and easy to manage. Now these names can be descriptive and reflect the purpose of the volume, which makes it easier to understand and their role in your containerized application. That is user defined names. Now data persistence. The major use of this named volume is for data persistence. Data stored in the named volumes persist even if the associated containers are removed or replaced. Now what does that mean? Let's say there is a container. I am assigning a named volume to this container. Now even this container is removed or it is lost, still there will be data in this named volume that we can attach to another container if we want to. Okay. Now one more use of this named volumes. This named volumes we can share between the containers. Same volume I can give it to another container. Same volume I can give it to another container, so that data sharing is possible. Okay, with the help of named volumes, as I told you, data backup is possible and data migration is also possible with the help of named volumes. Okay, so these are some of the examples of or use case of named volumes. One is for persistence, second is for data sharing, third is for migration and backup. All right. So now, how can I create this named volume? Okay, we will see that hands-on exercise. But to just tell you, the syntax would be very easy. It would be Docker volume create and the name of the volume. Very simple syntax. If I give this syntax, we will be able to create a volume. Now let's say if I have to give the volume to the container, so when I'm creating a container by using Docker run, okay, we can give an argument called as -v and give a name of the volume. So if there is no named volume, it will automatically create that volume. Okay. We will look in this hands-on when we are doing hands-on. That is about named volumes. What is the second type of volume? The second type of volume is called as bind mount. This is very, very important. The second type of volume is called as bind mount. Now this bind mount volumes, okay, these are very, very important volumes. Let's take this is a bind mount. Okay, with this bind mount volume, it provides, or let's say we can mount, we can mount a file or a directory from a host machine into the container. Okay, so let us understand that. Let me put an image. Let's say this is a host machine. Okay, this is a host machine. Now let's say we created one container. Okay, now in my host machine, okay, in my host machine, I created one directory. Let's say I used a syntax called as mkdir, and I used directory name as sample. Okay, now in this sample directory, I have files like file 1, file 2, or file 3. Now, if my container has to access these files directly from the host system, then we can use something called as bind mounts. Okay. How we can do that? Let's say in this container, I'm creating one folder. Folder name is, let's say, slash app. Okay. The path of the folder is slash app. Now what I can do, I can map this folder. Okay, what is the path of this folder? Slash, for example, sample colon slash app. Now what happens in this container from the path called as slash app, I'll be able to directly access the files which are there in this particular folder. Okay, so that means in a bind mount, unlike the named volumes are managed by the Docker and are more suitable for persisting the data between the containers. But the bind mounts provides direct access to the files and directories which are there in this particular host system. Okay, in this host system we have the files. Now if your container has to directly access, it can be we can give a map the folder which is there on the container to the folder which is there on the host machine. So whatever files which is there in this particular folder can be accessed by the container. Now what could be the use case of this? Now let us say I'm creating a one application. Let's say I'm creating one image. Okay, in the image we have one index.html file. Okay, now with this image we have created a container. Now this container we have exposed. Okay, now a web page is coming like this. Now let's say I want to change couple of things on this web page. Now how can I do that? Can I make changes to this image directly? If I make changes to the image, will the container will change? It will not change. Okay, because this container is created. Next time again I have to create a container with the changed image. Or we have to create a new image with a new file. And that is not possible, right? So instead of that, on the host machine, I'll create a folder. I will put all the files related to the application here. And I will create a folder in the container and map this folder here. So if I just make changes to the application code here, it will reflect in the container. That is the use of bind mount. Okay, once we do one simple hands-on exercise, it will be very easy for us to understand. Let me switch to my presentation and see a couple of little bit theory about volumes, and then we will see hands-on exercise. Now let's say, now by default all the files created inside a container are stored on a writable container layer. The data does not process. This is the main reason why we need volumes, because the data is not persistent. That means if the container no longer exists, the data also will not be able to retrieve that. Why? Because the container writable layer is tightly coupled with the host machine where the container is running, and we can't easily move the data somewhere else. Okay. Now that is a problem. Now what are the options that we have? Now Docker has two options for containers to store files on the host machine, so that the files are persisted even if the container stops. What are those two options? One is called as volumes, second is called as bind mounts. The volumes, we can also call them as named volumes. Okay. Now let's say Docker also support another type of storage which is not persistent. That is basically called as temporary storage. If you're running Docker on Linux, it is basically TMFS file. If the storage is more, it is not guaranteed that data will be there. Okay. Now, volumes are stored in part of the host file system which are managed by, so by default it is created under a directory called as slash var slash lib slash docker slash volumes. This is where all the volumes are created. So the non-docker processor should not modify this part of the file system. Volumes are best way to persist data in Docker. Okay. Now, if you see here, so this is a container and we have a volume. Okay. The volume is stored in this particular path. All right. Now, what are bind mounts? Bind mounts may be stored anywhere on the host system. Okay. Now, okay, one more difference. If you're creating a named volume, the named volumes are created only on this particular folder, slash var slash lib docker slash volume. But a bind mount you can create anywhere, like a normal folder we can create on a Linux file system, and that folder can be mapped with the container. Okay, bind mounts may be stored anywhere on the host system. They may even be important files like directories or non-Docker processes on the Docker host, or a Docker container can also modify. That means if I want to modify a file, it's not mandatory that I need to log into a container. I can directly modify that also. That is nothing but a bind mount. Now, as I told you, there is temporary mounts also that are stored in the host system's memory only and are never returned to the host system file systems. Now again, volumes are preferred mechanism for persisting data generated by and used by the Docker containers. Now bind mounts are dependent on the directory structure and OS of the host machine. Volumes are completely managed by the Docker. When I say volumes, it could be referred as named volumes. Okay. How to create Docker volume? Create and give a name. If I want to remove a volume, simply we can use docker volume rm and remove it. If we want to see the list of volumes, docker volume ls. Okay. So let us go ahead and see the hands-on exercise. Let me shift to my Docker host. Okay, let's say I am on the Docker host. First of all, let me see the Docker version. Docker version. It will be Docker hyphen hyphen version. Enter. Now you see Docker version is this. Now let's say Docker volume ls. So it is Docker volume ls. Enter. Permission D is denied. Let us run as sudo docker volume ls. So this many volumes are there here. Okay, now let's say if I want to remove any volume, docker volume rm, the volume name is demo4, right? Demo4, enter. Okay, now let's do a docker volume ls. Now you see that volume demo4 is not there anymore. Okay, so that is how we can create docker volume and remove a docker volume. Now let me create one docker volume. Docker volume create. Let me give the name of the docker volume as demo vol1 and enter. Okay, let me run as sudo user. Now the docker volume 1 is created. Let us see docker volume ls, and we can see this volume demo vol 1 is created. Okay, now let us see the full details about this volume. We can use the syntax docker volume inspect. I have to give the volume name demo vol1, enter. Now you see I can see the full details about this volume. When it is created, you see the path. The mount path is /var /lib docker volumes demo volume /data. Now whatever data that is stored in this particular volume, this is the part this is going to store. Now I have not given this contain volume to any of the containers, right? Now let's say I want to give this volume to a container. Okay. First of all, let me create a container, or while creating the container itself, we can give it. Okay. Let's say docker run -d, that is in detached mode, hyphen name. The name of the container I want to give it as demo vol container -v. -v stands for volume. Okay, -v stands for volume. And what is the volume I have created? I have created a volume by name demo volume run, right? I'll give it as demo vol 1. Okay, and let's say I want this to be attached to a container that I'm creating, right? Now let's say I will give the image name as Ubuntu. I want to create a Ubuntu container, and the container should name be demo vol con, and then there should be a volume that is assigned to this container called as demo vol 1. This is what we have created. Let me enter. Okay, now the container is created. Let me log in as sudo user. Okay, now clear. Now let's see the containers. Docker ps-a. Now you see this container is created. Container name is, you see, demo vol container. Okay, now let us inspect this container. Docker inspect Docker wall 1. Now if I see, we will get the full details about this particular container. Okay. Just gave inspect and the container name. I'm getting full details about this. So what is the ID of this container? What is the bash it is using? Okay. Now if I scroll down, it will also show the volume that I'm using for this particular container. Let's say the volume, you see here, the volume is, this is the volume, and it is stored in the location called as slash var slash lib docker volumes, okay, slash data. This is where it is stored, and the destination is demo vol 1. That is what the volume that we have created. Okay, that is the volume we have created. All the data in this container, now it will store in this particular volume. That is how we can create named volumes. Okay, now it's not required that we have to create a volume and give it. Let's say I'm using the same syntax again, but okay, let's say docker run uh, hyphen d hyphen name. I'll say the container name as new container hyphen v my first wall, and the image is Ubuntu. So now I don't have a volume by name my first wall, but system will automatically create this volume called as my first wall, and then it will attach to this particular image or this particular container. Now let us see the volumes now. Docker volume, Docker volume ls. Now if you see this my first wall, so this is one of these volumes will be my first one. Okay, or else we can also see like this: docker volume inspect my first wall. Okay, now let's inspect this container docker ps hyphen a. What is the container name? Newcon, right? Let me take this container docker inspect and the container. So basically it is not giving the name, it is not giving the name that we have choose, but it is giving a uh, big name that the system creates automatically. Okay, now if you see volumes, under the volumes you have this my first wall. So it automatically created the volume called as my first wall, and all the data that is created by this is assigned or stored in this particular volume called as my first volume. Okay, now let us say the same volume my first volume. Okay, I will give it to another container. Let's say my container name is my new con1 enter. Okay, now let's say inspect this new container. If I click go here, if you see the volumes to this, you see for this also the same volume. That means both the containers can share the data between, or both the containers can share the data which is there in this particular volume. Okay, that is the use of named volumes. Okay, now let us look into the second hands-on exercise for the bind mounts. Okay, to for that let me create one folder mkdir. Let me give the folder name as bind demo. Enter. Okay, let me go into this cd bind demo. Enter. Let me clear this screen. Now this bind demo folder I created in my host system, not on a container. Okay. Now let's say, let me create a file here. Let's say vi index.html. Enter. Okay. Now let me insert some data here. Okay. I'm just writing, making a note. This is for bind mount demo. Okay. I'm saving and exit. Now, where is this file? This file is there in my local host system. Okay. Now, let's say I'm creating a container sudo docker run -d is detached mode, and I want that to be on port -p stands for port 8086. Okay. Map to port 80 -v. Okay. -v. And okay, first of all, I should know the path of where is this index.html file. For that, let me use pwd. Okay, it is there in /home /ubuntu in the folder bind demo. Okay, now let me use that docker run -d -p 8086 colon 80 -v. Now let me give this path. This path is home Ubuntu bind demo. Okay. And I want to, whatever data is there in this folder, this should be shared on a drive called as /share/nginx/html. Okay. Where on the server by name, I'll give the name of the server as web demo 1. Okay, it has to use an image called as nginx. Okay, let me run this. Now you see a container is created. Now I have not copied any index.html file or any other file, right? What I did, that file is there in my local system. I have mapped to one of the folders which is there on the container. Okay. Now let us see whether that web page is up or not. Let me go back to my browser. This is the IP address. Let me copy this IP address. And the port number is 8086. I think that is a port number. Now if you see, this is for bind mount demo. Okay, that is up. Now let's see the magic of this bind mount. Now let's go here. What is the file? ls. I have this index.html, right? Now I have not logged onto the container at all. Now let me go to vi index.html and let me make edit to this file. This is the power of using bind mount. I'm just updating the file from my local host system, not on the container. Now let me go here and refresh this. You see, this has changed. That means we can clearly see that whatever it is there on my host system, that is being shared with the container. All right. So that is the use of bind mounts. So this is the hands-on exercise that we have done. So in this particular chapter, we understood what is the importance of volumes. We discussed about named volumes. We discussed about bind mounts, and we saw hands-on exercise for both the types of volumes. All right. Thank you for joining this session. You guys have a good time. See you guys in the next session.